Russia has made regular advances along the front lines in eastern Ukraine while raining drones and missiles on targets in Kyiv and across the country in recent months. But the summer offensive has only gained limited territory, while at a huge cost to the lives of Russian troops. Let's look at where this much-anticipated offensive has failed.
The front line in Ukraine. Russian forces pushing relentlessly forward, but at a very slow rate, taking thousands of casualties every week. 6 months ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin said there were reasons to believe his country's forces could finish off Ukraine's military. At the time, Ukraine seemed set to lose U.S. support after President Volodymyr Zelensky's disastrous White House visit. Early this summer, Putin painted a picture of constant Russian progress.
Our troops are advancing along the entire line of contact. Every day, more or less, but every day they go forward. And further advancement, even if Ukraine uses long-range Taurus missiles, is inevitable.
But Russia has actually gained very little territory during its inevitable summer offensive. This map shows the front lines in April 2025 and now. Russia has taken a small sliver of Ukrainian territory this summer, marked here in red, while losing tens of thousands of soldiers. The city of Pokrovsk, which Russia sees as key to taking the Donbas region, is still in Ukrainian hands after nearly 2 years of heavy fighting. Russia claims territorial gains when small mobile units, like those shown in this official Russia state propaganda video, penetrate the front line. But those units often cannot hold the territory, and Ukraine has fortified its front line heavily to repel Russian attacks. Meanwhile, Russia has ramped up its drone and missile attacks on Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. This weekend saw the heaviest strikes yet. But Russia has been trying that tactic in the absence of big battlefield gains for over 2 years now, without breaking Ukraine's resolve. On the front line, Ukraine has to contend with manpower shortages and morale problems, while Russia masses troops in the east to make its fall offensive. The latest campaign intended to finish Ukraine off.
Peter Dickinson is editor of the Atlantic Council's UkraineAlert service. He's been a leading voice on Ukrainian affairs for many years, as well as Russia's invasion. Welcome to DW News. Has the Russian summer offensive failed because of Russian weakness or Ukrainian strength?
Good morning. Well, that's a good question. I think it's a combination of both. I think Ukraine has certainly managed to strengthen its defences, its fortifications, and in particular, Ukraine has been very successful in establishing a very broad kill zone along the front lines using drones. So what Ukrainians refer to as the drone wall has proved a very effective tool at preventing Russia from consolidating any gains and concentrating armour. So while Russia is able to use these small units, often employing sort of ad hoc transports, motorbikes, golf buggies, even that sort of thing, to get through the front lines, to penetrate them here and there, it's very difficult for the Russians to bring together large amounts of armour, tanks, armoured vehicles and so forth, and push through and hold territory and expand on these gains. So it's getting more and more difficult for the Russians because of Ukraine's strengthening defences. But I think we should also not underestimate how difficult it is for Putin's army now. They're suffering very, very heavy casualties. That's obviously sapping their morale. And the quality of the people they're attracting to the army is declining. They're getting a lot of older people. A lot of the soldiers who are fighting in the Russian ranks now are much older people who do not have the training that they need to be able to conduct the kind of very complex operations that Putin's looking to do, that his commanders are looking to coordinate. So they're also looking to work with quite limited sort of human material there, and having a lot of trouble, as we can see. The gains they've managed to accumulate over the last 3 months have been minimal, and the costs have been pretty catastrophic.
OK, so you refer to these older Russian troops, the Ukraine strengthening defences. What about Ukraine's offences then, doesn't all of that put Ukraine in a very good position to push back Russia?
But Ukraine also has its problems in terms of personnel, in terms of morale, but particularly in personnel. So, in order to mount serious counteroffensives, Ukraine will need to get more troops onto the front lines. Actually, there have been reports in recent days from Ukraine's commander-in-chief that over the past month, at a number of key points on the front line, Ukraine did regain more territory than it lost. So around Pokrovsk, which is probably the key point of the entire war at the moment, the main hotspot, and at a few other very strategically important points on the front line, Ukraine was able to regain more land than it lost, to push the Russians back, and to make some small advances. But we are talking about fields, villages, very, very limited areas. I think Ukraine's total claimed regained territory was slightly under 50 square kilometres, which is essentially less than a town. So they're really fighting over scraps, and the movement on the front line is minimal in either direction.
Mm-hmm. Many Western governments seem to believe Russia is the one that's slowly and inevitably advancing, and it's a matter of time until a major breakthrough is made. Is that a misconception, would you say?
Well, we've seen people exaggerate Russia's strength since this war began. In fact, since before the war began. We heard before the beginning of the war, of course, these famous predictions that Ukraine would fall within a matter of days. The Russians certainly seem to think so. They invaded Ukraine with their parade costumes in their baggage as they hope to get to Kyiv and hold a victory parade. Many in the West were also offering the similarly sort of gloomy predictions of Ukraine's ability to withstand. So that's nothing new, really. We've seen consistently that Russia is perceived as this sort of irresistible force militarily. That's been repeatedly proved, I would say, to be simply untrue. Ukraine is a far stronger force with much greater capabilities in the field, and Russia is not nearly as powerful as people seem to think. So I wouldn't exaggerate how, I would certainly not buy into this idea of inevitable Russian victory. I would say Ukraine is fighting back, is holding the Russians very strongly, and now we're also seeing Ukraine strike very effectively inside Russia, sort of bringing the war back to Putin, back to Russia, with these strikes on Russia's war machine inside Russia, and especially Russia's oil refineries, which is having a big impact on Russia's war economy and also on the logistics of the army.
So you'd say Ukraine isn't fighting a losing battle. Why then do you think there is this misconception among Western nations that Russia has the upper hand?
Well, Russia went into this war seen as the second most powerful military in the entire world, whereas Ukraine barely registered on the military map, as it were. So it was always seen as an extremely uneven contest, and in many ways it is. But again, I wouldn't exaggerate the strength of Russia's military or Ukraine's resolve. I think a lot of people in the West still feel that ultimately Russia will win through, and they often look back at historical examples of how Russia tends to grind out victories in wars. Very typically, Russia often wins wars whilst having lost far more soldiers than its opponents, which is quite unusual militarily. Typically, the victor loses far fewer troops than the vanquished. That's often not the case with Russia. So there is this sense that Russia fights its wars by simply overwhelming its opponents with numbers. And that's basically what Russia's trying to achieve in Ukraine today. But again, historically, Russia has lost a lot of wars where its opponents have received support from across the West, going back to the Crimean War, the Japanese War, the Polish-Soviet War at the beginning of the 20th century, and so on. So I think that the historical examples don't always support the idea that Russia's victory is inevitable. On the contrary, in fact. And Ukraine has demonstrated that it's more than capable of withstanding the Russians, especially if it can get the support it needs from the West. The key for Ukraine now is to hold the front and to bring the war to Russia with ever greater strength by these attacks on Russia's war economy and the oil refineries and the energy industry, to force Putin to rethink his calculus and to give him pause for thought about whether he can actually continue this war indefinitely.
Peter, I'd love to ask you a million more questions, but we're out of time. Thanks for being on our news programme today.
Thank you.